Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Grim and Guilty. On September 30th, 2020, 19-year-old Sydney West walked onto San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. She was caught on surveillance footage that morning, but after that, she was gone. No confirmed sightings, no body recovered, no answers. Sydney was a bright, young, athletic woman with dreams ahead of her. Yet her disappearance has left her family and community in heartbreak, still searching for closure. What really happened on that Golden Gate Bridge that day remains a haunting question. Sydney was born in Walnut Creek, California, but grew up mostly in Pleasanton before moving up to North Carolina with her family. By all accounts, she was talented and driven. She was a gifted writer, a strong student, and a former volleyball player whose athleticism carried her into her late teens. In 2019, she enrolled in UC Berkeley, majoring in environmental science. In 2019, she enrolled in UC Berkeley, majoring in environmental studies. Like many college students, she struggled with transition, balancing athletics, personal life, and the pressures of adulthood. The COVID-19 pandemic hit during her first year and it disrupted everything. Classes moved online, isolation grew, and Sydney's mental health began to suffer. Her family said that she had been dealing with depression and anxiety, challenges made worse by uncertainty of the world around her. By the fall of 2020, Sydney had returned to the Bay Area to stay with friends while taking her courses remotely. That's when the day came that everything would change. Sydney left the place she was staying and made her way towards the Golden Gate Bridge. Surveillance cameras captured her walking onto the bridge around 6:45 a.m. She lingered there for a while, but what happened next remains unclear. Officials believe that she may have gone over the side of the bridge, but no witnesses confirmed it. The Coast Guard searched the waters below, yet no body was ever recovered. Unlike some bridge incidents, where tragedy is confirmed within hours, Sydney's disappearance remained open ended. There was no note, no confirmed jump, and no trace of her belongings except what she carried. For her family, that uncertainty has been unbearable. From the moment she vanished, her parents, Jay and Kimberly West, launched a relentless search campaign. They posted flyers, worked with police, spoke to the media, and created a website dedicated to finding her. Sydney's face was shared across social media platforms, with her family pleading for anyone who might have seen her that morning to come forward. Despite the wide coverage, tips and leads were scarce. With no confirmed sighting after the footage on the bridge, investigators leaned heavily on the theory that she had taken her own life. But without recovery, there was always a silver of doubt, a possibility that something else had happened. The bridge itself only deepened the mystery. The Golden Gate has been a magnet for suicides, with over 1,600 documented deaths since it opened in 1937. Yet, in Sydney's case, the absence of confirmation has left her family in limbo, unable to fully grieve or fully hope. Sydney's disappearance just didn't affect her family, it rippled through her community. Friends described her as kind, creative, and deeply empathetic. Teachers and coaches remember her as determined and bright. For many, the idea that she could vanish without a trace felt impossible. Her parents have spoken openly about the impact on their lives, the sleepless nights, the endless what ifs, the cruel of uncertainty of not knowing whether their daughter is alive or gone. They kept her story alive in the media, not just for answers, but to raise awareness about mental health struggles and the importance of seeking help. So, what really happened to Sydney West? One possibility, the one most investigators lean towards, is suicide. Sydney had struggled with depression and anxiety, and the Golden Gate Bridge is tragically known for such cases. The timing, the early morning walk, the lingering on the bridge, it all seems to fit. The absence of a body, while unusual, isn't unheard of. Strong tides in San Francisco Bay can carry remains out to the sea, never to be recovered. Another theory, though less supported, is that Sydney may have disappeared intentionally, not to end her life, but to start over. The pressures of college, the pandemic, and her personal struggles might have pushed her to step away completely. But if that were the case, there's no evidence she prepared for it, no withdrawn money, no planned escape, no contact since. A darker possibility is that something else happened on the bridge that morning. Could she have been the victim of foul play or an accident unrelated to suicide? There's little to suggest this, but the lack of concrete answers leaves the door cracked open. And then there's the perspective of her family, who live in the haunting in between. They don't dismiss the idea that she may have jumped, but without proof, they hold on to hope. Hope that maybe somehow she survived. Hope that one day someone will come forward with the missing piece. The disappearance of Sydney West is one of those stories that leaves you caught between tragedy and mystery. Without a body, there's no closure. Without answers, there's only speculation. Sydney was more than a case file. She was a daughter, a friend, a writer, and a young woman who should have had her whole life ahead of her. Whether she died that morning on the bridge or whether something else happened, her story is a reminder of how fragile and complex human struggles can be, and how mental health cries often unfold quietly without warning. For her family, the pain lies in the not knowing. They live each day with a hole that only the truth can fill. And until that truth surfaces, Sydney's story will remain open. Sydney was more than a case file. She was a daughter, a friend, a writer, and a young woman who should have had her whole life ahead of her. Whether she died that morning on the bridge or whether something else happened, her story is a reminder of how fragile and complex human struggles can be and how mental health crises often unfold quietly without warning. For her family, the pain lies in the not knowing. They live each day with a hole that can only be filled with the truth. And until that truth surfaces, Sydney's stories will remain an open wound, a disappearance that haunts not just the Golden Gate Bridge, but everyone who hears her name. If you have any information on Sydney West's whereabouts, please contact the family's PI, Scott Dubeck, at 925-852-4204. In the summer of 1518, the streets of Strasbourg, a city then part of the Holy Roman Empire, filled with musicless movement. Dozens of people began to dance uncontrollably. They weren't celebrating or performing. They were trapped in a frenzy, their bodies moving against their will. Some collapsed from exhaustion, others died where they stood. It lasted for weeks, baffling city leaders and terrifying the community. This bizarre event has come to be known as the Dancing Plague of 1518, one of history's most chilling and unexplained outbreaks. To picture Strasbourg in 1518, we need to remember the world it existed in. It was a hot July and the city was in crisis. Crops had failed the year before and disease lurked in every corner. Poverty was in rampant and with it came despair. Religious belief dominated daily life, and with that came superstition. Many people genuinely believed sins could manifest as plagues, curses, or divine punishment. In a world with little understanding of science or medicine, events were often interpreted through the lens of religion and fear. Against that backdrop of hardship and spiritual anxiety, something strange began to unfold. It started with a woman named Frau Trofea. One July morning, she stepped into the street and began to dance. Not with joy, not with rhythm, but with a strange, compulsive energy. Witnesses said she danced for hours, her feet pounding against the cobblestones. When night fell, she collapsed in exhaustion, only to rise the next day and continue. For nearly a week, she danced and danced, her body refusing to rest. Soon, others joined her, not willingly, but as if pulled into the same madness. Within days, dozens were dancing in the streets, unable to stop themselves. Their faces showed pain, not pleasure. Their feet bled, their bodies convulsed, and still they danced. Within a month, the number of dancers had grown to around 400. The city was overcome with the sound of shuffling feet, groans of exhaustion, and cries for relief. What's most ter- What's most horrifying is that some dancers literally died where they stood. Heart attacks, strokes, sheer exhaustion. The human body simply couldn't endure the endless movement. The authorities were desperate. Their first response, they thought the only cure was to let it burn itself out. Musicians were hired and a stage was built. so the afflicted could dance to live music. Imagine that, a city so baffled that they gave the suffering a soundtrack. Instead of easing the frenzy, it fueled it. More people joined in, swept up by the hysteria. As the crisis worsened, religious leaders declared the plague a punishment for Saint Vitus, the patron of saint of dancers. Victims were loaded onto wagons and taken to a shrine dedicated to him, where they were prayed over, blessed, and given red shoes to wear. By September, the madness began to fade. Slowly, the dancers collapsed, healed, or died, and the city returned to uneasy quiet. So, what caused the dancing plague of 1518? Historians and scientists still debate it. One theory points to mass hysteria or mass psychogenic illness. Under conditions of disease and deep religious fear, people have fallen into the psychological state where stress manifested physically. One person's breakdown became contagious, spreading through the community until hundreds were caught up in it. Another theory suggests ergot poisoning. Ergot is a toxic mold that grows on rye and can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and spasms. It's the same fungus linked to the theories about the Salem witch trials a century later. But critics argue ergot poisoning would have made people sick, not caused rhythmic dancing for weeks. Some point to the neurological disorders or epilepsy, though some don't explain the scale of the outbreak. And then there's the spiritual explanation. The only people in 1950 themselves believed that this was a divine punishment. Saint Vitus was known as a protector against dancing sickness, and the locals were convinced that victims had been cursed. For a deeply religious society, it made sense. When science can't explain it, the supernatural often steps in. Perhaps the truth is a mix of starvation, stress, and fear, pushing people into an altered state, their bodies channeling the trauma in ways that we struggle to understand. The dancing plague of 1518 has no neat conclusion. It appeared suddenly, consumed hundreds of lives, and then vanished, leaving only questions in its wake. What makes it so haunting is how alien it feels, yet how human. These weren't supernatural beings or distant legends. They were ordinary people swept up in something they couldn't control. Their bodies became prisons, forcing them to dance until they broke. Today, we can look back and call it hysteria, poisoning, or stress, but for people in Strasbourg, it was a walking nightmare, proof that the line between the supernatural and natural was razor thin. And maybe that's the real terror, the idea that under the right conditions, the mind and the body can betray us so completely, turning us into unwilling participants in a story we'll never fully understand.